Hello.
Our story begins with murder, a bond cemented for centuries interrupted by a rogue assailant. The Sith and Nightsisters had long considered themselves acquaintances at best, something that suited both of them in the case that the Jedi ever targeted the Nightsister clan. Since the Jedi didn't care about the existence of other Force sects aside from the Sith, they wouldn't ever bother Mother Talzin's clan. Though this murder came at a great shock. A masked man, with his apprentice who also wore a mask of the same sort, entered the Nightsister camp in the middle of the night, after visiting the nearby clan of Singing Mountain. The Mountain Coven had pretty much been killed, and they were making their mark against the Nightsisters too. Keemir and Osha were betrayed by their master. Plagueis the Wise had seen a vision of a boy from the luxurious world of Naboo. In the future 30 years, he would find this boy and train him, and name him Sidious. It was at this that Plagueis also realized that the bond between his apprentice and Keemir's acolyte were too entrenched. Osha and Keemir were connected by a deeper bond than can exist between Keemir and himself. Plagueis didn't fear these disciples of the Sith path, but he did set out to kill them both, nearly fatally injuring Osha and sending Keemir away with another scar, like the one his dear master Venestra left him with. By this point, the hunt for the sister had been lost to time. May and Master Venestra, like many Jedi within the Bay Knight era, went missing without a trail. The High Council usually presumed estranged Jedi abandoned the Order without warning, and Venestra had become estranged since Sol's betrayal. The Jedi Council, though, was not involved or aware of what had taken place on Dathomir. As a result of Plagueis' decision to kill his apprentice and the acolyte, he had just accidentally set off two loose ends. Keemir was hopeful to turn the Dathomiri Nightsisters against his master. Both he and his acolyte had been betrayed twice, first by a Jedi, now by a Sith. This would lead to the eventual formation of the Knights of Ren, but for now, the trouble they created turned Mother Talzin and her clan against the Sith. Keemir and Osha snuck into their coven after killing every single member of the Singing Mountain clan, and then they assassinated Old Daka and a few other elders. Mother Talzin wasn't inside the cave when they struck, and by the time she returned, she saw dead bodies and fires. The Nightsister clan protected itself, but by the time they did, it was technically too late. The Sith, at least according to her sisters, had escaped with some trinkets stolen from Old Daka's body. The first-hand witnesses who had interacted and seen Plagueis and his students before knew that this was an attack made by the Sith. Mother Talzin wasn't immediately focused on revenge. She instead went to Old Daka's and the other elders' bodies and memorialized them. They would be laid to rest in the water of life, so that they may find their peace and tranquility with the sisters who lived and died before them. When these ceremonies were completed, which did include the now dead clan of Singing Mountain clan, Talzin reached out through the Force to find Plagueis. She would extract revenge, but that was an unattainable goal. He concealed his essence better than any other living being in the galaxy. He was the most gifted student of the Bay Knight lineage, and now with his own master, Tenebras, he continued to evade the attempts for revenge made by the Nightsisters. Talzin made efforts to confront him with her warriors. They visited the Cortosis Island on Baldamek, but found no traces. There were some other known locations that they went to, including Kreis too, but they avoided returning to Morabon, or as the ancients referred to it, Korriban. Talzin dare not speak that word. The change made to the name kept it off star charts and provided the Sith with an extra layer of secrecy. That same secrecy kept Mother Talzin from finding those who damned her coven to pain. Plagueis was too great a threat, and despite him pushing past a half-century of life, she knew his power would continue to grow. He would have no issue eclipsing Tenebras when he felt the time was right. So, what was she and her coven to do to protect themselves from another Sith attack, which is what they presumed this would be? Talzin's first instinct was Force experimentations. 13 Night Brothers were abducted, and they were immediately experimented on. If they died, then they were necessary losses in her eyes. The brothers used in these experiments would receive physical enhancements to make them stronger or more brutish, yet nothing the sisters did provided them with enough peace of mind to protect themselves. What also, during this time, continued to irritate Talzin is that since she was gone when the attack happened, if Plagueis had come to Dathomir himself, he would have finished the job. He was perhaps the only other individual in the galaxy besides Yoda that she feared, an individual that harbored enough power to actually be a threat. Talzin, as a result, after failing to extract results from the experimental brothers, sacrificed them each and requested an audience with the Grand Master of the Jedi Order. As an added note, the Sith were completely unaware of these changes. Plagueis and Tenebros did not know that their acolytes had betrayed them. They also had assumed that Osha and Kemir had already died. Their sect, the Knights of Ren, would not be a suitable replacement for the Sith. Once the two founders eventually passed on from natural causes, there wouldn't be any other to rise in their places. They were the strongest to lead their sect. Following their deaths, the Knights of Ren would become a group of marauders that obsessed over a single individual who harbored a sense of understanding for the Force, but did not master it. Tradition would see Kemir and Osha as the most powerful beings ever to live outside the Jedi Order. Yoda, though, on Coruscant, woke from his sleep when an apparition of the legendary mother of the Nightsisters presented herself. She asked that he come to Dathomir. She had information that would prove to be beneficial to his cause. Yoda, surprised by this reach from Talzin, decided to attempt it. By this point, 30 years before Plagueis took on his own student of Palpatine in the year 97 BBY, Yoda was eyeing his final student. A young boy named Dooku, born in 102 BBY, was a talented young Jedi. The Grand Master didn't want to miss out on training one final student, and he eagerly looked forward to the day he could train Dooku. But he informed the Jedi Council that he would go to Dathomir to investigate the request made by Talzin. They were wary of his decision, but he believed it to be of vital importance. Like Talzin, Yoda understood that they were not allies. They had a mutual understanding of their own interpretation of the Force. This was not to be used against the other, because their interpretations did not harm the Force itself. If the Nightsisters abused the Force, like the Sith did, then the Jedi would have problems, but that hadn't been the case. In this, Yoda, unaccompanied, departed from the Jedi Temple and left for Dathomir. When he arrived, he was greeted graciously by the clan. This was his third time on the planet. He had been here when he was a Jedi apprentice, nearly 800 years ago, once before the peak of the High Republic. And the second visit, some 300 years ago, was when Mother Talzin was learning under Old Daka. They had all gotten along quite well. These were more or less routine expeditions from the Jedi, and they crossed paths. The first trip was when the Jedi were ensuring the Sith had been defeated, and they followed a cold trail that died up on Dathomir. The second time, there had been an influx of Force activity from the planet that they came to investigate. Neither resulted in any hostility, but the second trip gave Yoda and Mother Talzin a line of communication. He waddled across the surface of the planet with an escort of Nightsisters before he looked up to see Mother Talzin. He complimented her, and she graciously smiled and accepted before inviting him in. All the customary talk would be accomplished by the time they actually reached the discussion room. Most of this involved how are yous, growth of the Jedi or the clan, and maybe some personal points of interest. When Yoda got to his high chair, her tone shifted, and he looked at her with a little bit of concern. He didn't necessarily care if he died here, but he didn't think she would bring him out here to kill him. Despite the tonal shift suggesting death, he didn't necessarily connect that to himself. There was something else happening here. Talzin sighed and told Yoda, plain and simple, that their mutual trust had been a lie. She and her clan had known about the Sith since a few generations after Darth Bane. Yoda rubbed his chin. The rule of two was thought to be the destruction of the Sith. As mentioned in Phantom Menace, Yoda suggested here, only two Sith there could be, a master and an apprentice. Talzin revealed that the line which the Jedi had thought went extinct shortly before Yoda's birth were in fact alive. They hid in secrecy and maintained their allegiance to darkness. Talzin revealed that a Nightsister had been a Sith before, but these were not common alliances. Frequently, the Sith chose individuals that slipped past the Jedi. However, she explained that she did not bring him here to talk about the Banite lineage. She expressed heartily and frustratedly that the Sith existed in spite of themselves. All of their acts of selfishness would damn them someday, and today it would be that day. She opened a green orb and displayed it for Yoda to see. It showed two masked acolytes weaving their crimson sabers through the Nightsisters and eventually executing Old Daka. Yoda couldn't believe his eyes. The Sith had returned. This was as clear a sign as he had ever seen in his life. Talzin continued telling Yoda that the Jedi and Nightsisters had always maintained an understanding of one another. She was proposing unity. Whether or not Plagueis and his master requested for their students to attack their clan, she didn't care. The Sith had broken the treaty knowingly or unknowingly, and they were going to pay for it. She, along with the orb, handed over to Yoda a series of planets that Plagueis had been known to frequent, wise enough to hide his actual home locations, which usually consisted of Coruscant and Megiddo. He was a Sith. Of course he had secret lairs on Baltimore and other caves around the galaxy, but once Chimera and Osha were branded as useless, he abandoned everywhere they might know. That's how the Banite Sith survived, and that's how Plagueis and his instructor maintained their reign. Yoda asked Talzin what she wanted as a result of this information, and she smiled almost sinisterly. She wanted a true alliance. Mother Talzin knew that the Jedi were not vengeful by habit, and she could utilize that for her clan's success. No matter what the Nightsisters did, if the Jedi agreed to this alliance, then they wouldn't be targeted because unless forced to, a Jedi would never use their lightsaber. She told Yoda that she wanted a transparent alliance, one in which her clan and the Jedi Order intersected for the first time in their history. She and her surviving elders could teach Jedi Masters and Knights the subtleties of the Force, and they could, in turn, bring Zabraks or Nightsisters to their temple and teach them to be Jedi. Of course, there would be limits, but it could be a closer relationship than the one shared between the Order and the Baron of Sages. Yoda nodded his head, informing her earnestly that he would think on this and consult his council. She thanked him for his time, and he departed. In the next few weeks, the Jedi and Nightsisters would form an actual coalition, one in which they put full trust into the other. It was very necessary if this bond were to work, and Mother Talzin would visit the temple for the first time in her life, as a few members of the council visited Dathomir to protect her coven in case Plagueis returned. The Jedi Order, though, would be especially tense. They semi-trusted Talzin, but they saw her evidence. The crimson-wielding monsters that tore up her home needed to be destroyed before they brought such pain to the rest of the galaxy. Talzin kept honest about her intentions to maintain a firm relationship with the Jedi and those of his order. She promised and she would instruct classes of Jedi with a sense of enjoyment. The Jedi, in response to the orb they saw 100 times and again, started to prepare for war. The Banite lineage may have been thought to be dead, but these were Sith starved of victory. The Jedi needed to be prepared as swordsmen and swordswomen. They had to have resolve, calmness, and preparedness in the Force. They couldn't be breakable or unready. This led to the Jedi striking up conversation with what could best be equatable to a Gilded Age Republic. The years of the High Republic were over. Slowly it was slipping out of a golden age into one of corruption. The Gilded Republic would receive these worries and implement some requests. For example, a Force-sensitive reader inside the main chambers of the Executive and Senate buildings. These were built into the walls and didn't require anyone to stop. Plagueis and Tenebros would learn about this before ever sending their own representative to the Senate. They always had contacts inside the Senate, but they weren't going to be the ones to sway the galactic populace. That boy Plagueis had a vision of would be that one. However, because Hego Damask II was a very important banker, Plagueis and Tenebros, as a result of the Jedi moves, would begin their work to craft an amulet. It would be encased in a Force spell, one that wouldn't send any readings to the readers inside these buildings. As long as an individual Sith wore it, they would not be discovered. Now came the fun part, the waiting game. Despite the Nightsisters and Jedi forming a coalition, much wouldn't be changed until the year 41 BBY. In the years leading up to this, the Gilded Age had come to an end. Corruption was sweeping through the galaxy, and the Order was recoiling as a result. Though their alliance with the Nightsisters had proven to be very useful for them. Training inside the halls of the Jedi Temple were Asajj Ventress, Savage Oprez, Farrell, and Maul. There were a couple of other Nightsisters, but the Order and clan kept their numbers at a fair size. Some of these members chose to join the Order late in life. Others were plucked from the crowd, but still given a chance to rejoin their coven. Since the Sith were revealed to be alive, the Jedi hadn't found them. They had interacted with Hego Damask a number of times, but that didn't result in anything. And since 67 BBY, after Plagueis killed his master, they had spoken to the Senator from Naboo. The Sith amulets, which protected them from Jedi interventions within the Republic, had continued to be effective. Sidious and Plagueis just maintained their own cover for themselves. This, though, was the year they accidentally went too far with the Force. They unknowingly created a reaction that would encourage the Force to produce the Chosen One. No one would know, but the Nightsisters felt a cosmic shift. Something had changed. The relationship between the clan and the Order was better than ever. It helped people like Dooku to have Talzin to turn to. He struggled with some of the bureaucratic choices made by the Jedi Order and its council. They were confounding. Yet the elder of the clan, Mother Talzin, was always open to young brothers and sisters from the Jedi. The Order in her eyes was as much of her clan as she was of their order. There was an ebb and flow to the dynamic, and it was comforting to say the least. The Sith clearly got the message by this point, so Sidious's new apprentice was no one. He didn't have a Maul to abduct from the Nightsisters, and he had a student at one point but accidentally killed him for being too weak. The Sith were just two, and that was all they needed in Plagueis' mind. Having a third or fourth could create unfavorable dynamics, like the ones previously seen with Osha and Kemir. In this, Plagueis was willing to break the rule of two, so that he and Palpatine could rule forever. His apprentice had other thoughts on ruling forever, and they didn't involve his master. Both had very different aspirations for bending the Banite lineage to favor their own aspirations. The Nightsisters would gather inside of old Daka's meditation room. The disturbance in the Force was like a whiplash for them. While Dathomir was no virgins in the Force as a planet, it was a powerfully Force-attuned planet. The Jedi who frequented here were usually priestesses or priests. The odd knight or master who wasn't took their training seriously with Mother Talzin. The Order had more warriors nowadays, and the unity with Mother Talzin provided a sanctuary in which the Jedi could more easily access the Force. Former Jedi outposts from the High and Gilded Ages were forgotten or abandoned due to lack of funding. Dathomir was free territory where they had a home, thus Jedi were more encouraged to go there. The bond created helped the Jedi diversify their understanding of the Force. While Mace Windu would develop Vapad without the Nightsisters, their presence definitely aided to the creation of the Force power. When the Virgins was created, Anakin, Talzin was teaching a class of young Jedi and Nightsisters. She felt her head pulsate and requested time to herself, interrupting their session. A Jedi counselor was always stationed on Dathomir, and in this current cycle, new member Plo Koon accompanied her. He'd been on the council for a few years following the death of his master, Tyvoka. Plo and a couple of other elders of the Nightsister clan accompanied Talzin into the meditation room, and they gathered together. Replicating similar Jedi techniques to feel through the Force, they knelt and sat, pressing their hands to the others' bodies, and focusing on one central force. Mother Talzin, who felt this shock the most, was the key to all of this. They remained silent and meditative for hours, until she saw a planet under twin suns. She saw a boy, a child created of the Force. She then saw the shadow of the Munsith Lord that had avoided them for so long. The silhouette of his apprentice could be seen kneeling behind him. Talzin tried to connect more, but the connection was severed. It was merely an instruction that she had seen. Palpatine was listening for orders, but the words were impossible to hear. They were muffled by the waves of the Force. The vision ended and Talzin fell backwards, helped up by her Jedi friend, who used great gentility with her. The Jedi and Nightsisters weren't necessarily permitted to touch Mother Talzin. Plo helped her up in an effort to assist her, which wouldn't be big trouble for anyone in the room. She explained what she saw, and Plo immediately, after gaining permission, informed the High Council. As a result, Qui-Gon with his student, Obi-Wan, and Dooku with his own student, Maul, left for Tatooine. They were being joined by counselors Yariel Poof and Even Peel. This was truly the dream team, but the council sent 2 Padawan learners because it could be good for their instruction. Seeing a planet like Tatooine in their early teens would be a good memory they wouldn't forget. Being trained by Yoda's lineage meant that there were high expectations for Obi-Wan and for Maul, but they quickly went. When they arrived, the planet was dusty and disgustingly hot. What they did not understand is that what the Great Mother felt was not the beginning, but the end. The creation had just been a side effect of the vast shock that was Anakin's birth in the Force. Creation was just an act of which the Sith were attempting again. Little parallels, coincidences if you will. The Sith recreating the same failure that resulted in Skywalker's creation the same day he was born. Perhaps the Force was giving the light a leg up. All anyone knew is that there were 6 Jedi on Tatooine, and a Sith was visiting too. The city of Mos Espa was not nearly as run down as Mos Eisley, but it wasn't far off. The system had been abandoned to the control of the Hutts, and everyone suffered as a result of this. Slavery was rampant, and Qui-Gon wished he hadn't agreed to let Obi-Wan or Maul see this. Dooku held different beliefs, seeing the failure of the Jedi as most evident here, but this was far beyond the control of the Jedi Order, and even Dooku knew that. They used similar technology from the Senate building to view midichlorian counts amongst the people out here without using a needle. This tech was developed because of the Nightsisters' revelation. Yariel even led the group, with Obi-Wan and Maul hanging around with each other. They acted like brothers, and were the bestest of friends. Maul did have his biological siblings, but he spent most of his time with Obi-Wan. Part of this was for the attachment rules of the Order. The other part was because they got along the best in their classes. As they continued searching the desert, they eventually bunkered down inside of a cantina for some refreshments. The Sith Lord, Plagueis, was also on Tatooine. Unlike Talzin, he didn't have a vision. He had been tracking Jedi transports. He followed this one because he sensed tension within the crew. Whatever he was attempting to do that created this may have been a failure. But there was something else out here that could be the salvation for all of those failures. He noted the squad of the Jedi. The biggest challenger from the group was Dooku, or the age-old Yariel Poof, but he knew he could win an encounter with them if he fought them correctly. Plagueis, though, had no intention to give the Jedi knowledge of his continued existence. He knew the Nightsisters betrayed him at some capacity, but he didn't even know how great the betrayal was, so he assumed that his best option was to play off the idea that he had died of old age. It was challenging to be here, but with the Jedi taking a break, he would investigate for himself. What neither party knew was that the Jedi were getting an aid. Mother Talzin, a group of sisters, and Plo Koon were on their way from Dathomir. She believed that she needed to be here for whatever she felt. Plagueis continued to move about the city, freely, searching for this burst of energy in the Force. Wherever or whoever it was lived near this current location. He could sense it, a child of the Force. Plagueis, ironically, had almost been tagged by the Jedi earlier during the day, but his amulet, which he put on the last second before leaving his ship, kept him safe. Seeing a Mun on Tatooine wasn't the most normal thing ever, but the Jedi, even the self-righteous Dooku, hadn't visited this world, so they couldn't just target the first Mun they would see that'd be speciest. The counselors knew what Plagueis was. The man they saw was clearly not a Sith, and the question then remained, who was his apprentice? Well, while the Jedi were meeting up with Talzin and Plo, Plagueis found what he was searching for. A child created by the Force, destined to destroy the Sith, and forever ruin his plans. Two alternative ideas crossed his mind. He could curse the child and let him destroy the Jedi from the inside out, or he could take the boy. Killing him never crossed his mind. He chose the latter because there was no chance the Jedi would ever let Anakin stay within the Order. Also, the apparent dynamic between the Nightsister and Jedi could remove any potential curses he put on the boy. Plagueis picked the baby up out of an incubator and killed his mother with a twist of his fingers. The child, named Anakin with his birth certificate wrapped in his mother's comforter, wailed. He was only an infant, so new to the galaxy, already losing the only family he had. The noise, though, was loud enough to catch the attention of the Jedi. Not typically would a child screaming be enough for them, but the pure distress and Talzin's reaction were enough to get them to move. Plagueis pressed his finger to Anakin's temple and put him to sleep, quieting the child as he shuffled across the desert sands. Then he heard Talzin's echoing voice. Because she wasn't here before, she didn't recognize him, but she was here now. Plagueis smiled and turned around, looking at the Jedi and the Great Mother of the Nightsister clan. He acknowledged her foolish new alliance, and she told him that he would pay for sending his little apprentices after their clan. A confused expression crossed his face. He didn't know why the sisters formed an alliance with the Jedi, and never really thought much of it, but now he knew the answer. Hymir was the traitor. Shame, too. Plagueis ignited his saber and told her and the Jedi that he'd be honored to finish his former apprentice's work. Even Peel called out the child that was sitting in Plagueis' hands, and the others saw, moving their weapons into ready positions. Obi-Wan and Maul were rushed back to the ship by one of Talzin's sisters. They were going to pilot the ship over the coming battle so they could get the child out of here. Plagueis egged the Jedi on, and Talzin searched for the best way to retrieve the boy without harming him. The Sith Lord knew he had the advantage here. He could afford to be sloppy, but he wouldn't be out of his desire for perfectionism. Yariel and Plo took point, with the other Nightsisters lining up on the buildings to fire arrows down at the Sith Lord. He weaved his saber in circles to defend himself, blocking shots away from him as he ducked under a high swing by Yariel and kicked even off his feet. He then parried Plo Koon and shoved him backwards. Qui-Gon and Dooku were right behind, and Plagueis stepped back, planting his foot firmly and jabbing his saber in, knocking Dooku away from seizing any advantage. With the Force, Qui-Gon was thrown backwards. Plagueis enjoyed the thrill of the fight, bashing his weapon into his attackers and defending every shot. Even though she wasn't yet involved, Plagueis was most concerned about Mother Talzin. Her mastery of the Force was the most worrying part of this fight. Anakin remained unconscious but alive in Plagueis' arm, cradled safely as the Sith Lord batted every strike away from him with relative ease. The street emptied out as the fight continued. Plagueis, with twists of his finger, killed Nightsisters and watched their bodies fall off the rooftops. Talzin, through all of this, remained as still as a statue. She continued concocting the Force. Her sisters died, and the Jedi continued to try and seize the advantage. There was a reason Sidious wouldn't fight Plagueis the Wise in a straight fight. Their sabers continued to connect. The Sith Lord shoved even Peel down to the ground, elbowing Yariel in the 10-foot neck, and using Trikata to discombobulate the rest of the Jedi. The deignition of his saber allowed him to avoid Plo's strike and then palm the Jedi's mask, ripping off of the Keldor's face and throwing the mask across the sand, before electrocuting Plo into the wall, leaving him to suffocate without being able to find his mask. Plagueis then ignited his saber again and attacked forward, shoving his saber through Qui-Gon's defense and nearly killing him. Any selfish, resentful thoughts Dooku may have held for the Jedi vanished in this moment, as he saved his apprentice and the true duel began. The Nightsisters moved to help their sisters as even Peel darted across the sands to help Master Plo. Dooku shoved his saber forward and the two masters of saber combat collided their blades. Their weapons screeched in the middle of their parry, and Dooku shoved forward, spinning under Plagueis' attempt to surprise the Jedi Master. As Dooku rose, he grinned a little before backhanding the saber down and knocking Plagueis' weapon into the dirt. He didn't drop it, but the sand bursted beneath his feet, before he avoided another jab and fired a storm of electricity at Dooku. His feet weren't steadied enough and he slipped in the sand before getting engulfed by blue light. Plagueis turned to see Qui-Gon standing before Mother Talzin as her last line of defense. He marched toward her, and as Qui-Gon attacked, he was force-choked and lifted off of his feet, before lightning was poured onto his body and he was thrown to the side, like Plo. Plagueis wanted to enjoy being a Sith for a moment. He could kill all the Jedi no problem, but Talzin needed to go first. He swung down once he got within range of her body, and she vanished. Plagueis' eyes widened and he stepped back. The world of Tatooine then went dark, and he could hear Dathomiri chanting. Talzin then appeared multiple times around him, showing herself to be a goddess of the Force, this being far from the truth. But she made Plagueis swing at various ghastly figures of herself, none of them being real. He screamed in fury, and swept his saber into the ground and countered by creating a force storm. Talzin didn't care. She used this as her opportunity to sneak the infant from Plagueis' hands. He was so focused on fending off this vile witch that he didn't even notice, and when his force storm broke her curse, she and the child were missing. Talzin cradled the boy and protected him as she and her sisters ran towards the Jedi starship, and when Plagueis realized Anakin was gone, he turned to see the Jedi facing him again. Yariel, Plo, Even, Qui-Gon, and Dooku stood in formation. One final fight to destroy the Sith Lord. This was the one Talzin had told the Jedi about years ago. Plagueis hadn't been this angry in his entire life, and he scowled before marching in. The Jedi were more wary this time, but moved in one fluid movement. They attacked at similar times. Plagueis was able to use a defensive masterclass to keep himself alive, which he did adequately, before getting rid of the easiest foes. Even Peel and Qui-Gon were his first targets. Smaller Jedi were always harder because they could surprise you, but they were also easy to dispose of. Master Peel jumped off of Plo's back and slammed blades into Plagueis', but the Sith Lord used his distance from the ground to launch Even into the air, sending him up hundreds of feet into it with a swift push of the Force. Plagueis used their energy against them, which was very uncommon for a Sith Lord, but it was necessary here. He could see the Jedi ship in the distance, and he needed to act now. Dooku shoved his way to the middle of the duel, presenting the most difficult target in this fight, with lightsabers at least. Plagueis used agility, mastery, and finesse to keep his opponents at bay. Even Peel returned to the fight, when Plo saved his life, by bracing him from impact. Dooku took point, pressing further, using his mastery of the saber over his skill with the Force. It was his one chance to win this. As Plagueis started to move for his reliance on the Force, Yariel swung around and smashed his saber against the Sith Lord's shoulder. And it was here where a display of power was never seen from a Jedi before. Plo Koon, in an effort to save Yariel from being decapitated, fired electricity into Plagueis' eyes. The Sith Lord fought blind, batting his saber at his opponents and trying to kill them all, but he was killed off with a final blow to the chest. Dooku shoved the weapon in and held it there, before telling the damned Sith to die like a rat in this desert. Plagueis felt the air leave his lungs, and the sight of the ship containing Anakin was the last thing he thought he saw before darkness engulfed him. Capturing the Chosen One was an important victory for the Jedi Order, but it didn't mean the Sith were completely dealt with. The apprentice remained a threat. At large or small, no one knew. But there was something that immediately aided the Jedi. Finding Skywalker and killing Plagueis came with a reward, a revelation. The amulet on Plagueis' body and some other artifacts hidden within his starship were keys to understanding how the Sith remained hidden, despite Jedi action. Talzin didn't know everything about Plagueis after all, so she couldn't tell them that he was a banker or influential within the core. She just knew he was a Mun. But now, despite the silhouette of Palpatine being accurate, the Jedi would make appropriate changes to their Senate Force readers. And wouldn't you know it, Sidious was hiding amongst their ranks for years as a senator. He continued to wear the amulet until one day the reader went off. However, Talzin, after learning of these amulets, requested one more thing from the Jedi. One thing to seal the deal between Nightsister and Jedi. The Council obliged. Well, it was like a two-parter. She wanted to raise Anakin as a Dathomiri Jedi, an individual raised within her culture with the values of the Jedi Order, the perfect collection. Part of this was because of the instant connection she felt when she saved him, but also because she believed it was fair. She did, after all, lead them to the boy. The second part was for her chance to deal with the Sith appropriately. The amulet found on Plagueis told them all that the Sith had been hiding in plain sight, so when, not if, they caught the last Sith, she wanted it brought to Dathomir. Either she would kill it, or give it a chance to be a real sentient again. She didn't care. All that mattered to Talzin was justice for what the Sith had done to her and her clan. Sidious took a leave of absence from the Senate for a week to consider his options. He had contingency plans prior to this, in the circumstance that something did happen to Plagueis. He was the last Sith alive, and that was a little problematic, but he had his plans, which involved abducting a Jedi student and turning them into basically a bomber, just something to shift focus away from the death of his master. Stealing a Jedi would be difficult, so he planned to wait until the Jedi held their gathering ceremony for younglings. It was a vicious plan, but he was a Sith after all. Well, the first day would go by when he entered the Senate. The amulet did not protect him, and the Jedi rallied. They would let Palpatine leave that night, and in the following morning, the full body of the Council would greet him, arrest him, and take him away. The Jedi had changed their readers to fit the amulet and counter what it produced, so they were able to learn who Palpatine was immediately. Republic policy as well allowed them to do that, because the Jedi re-established the guidelines during the Gilded Era. Since no one at the time thought it would happen, they gave the Jedi free reign. It was like their thanks for letting the Senate cut their budget. Anyways, Palpatine was brought to Dathomir, like Hannibal Lecter, and handed over to Mother Talzin, who planned to give the Sith the send-off they deserved. At this, the last of the Sith would be dragged into the Dathomiri caves, and never emerge. Ironically, she'd attempt a witch version of electric shock therapy, not to turn him, just out of curiosity. She wanted to break him, and Talzin really did. The Council didn't condone this, but they turned a blind eye because this was their alliance. She was free to act as she wished within the confines of it. In a funny way, the electric shock therapy would work on Palpatine. He would come out a changed man, but Talzin would still kill him. It would be nearly multiple years of endless torment, and when he broke, she took it all away in one swift strike. Despite the Sith being destroyed, it didn't change the Republic from tearing itself apart. There would be no clone army or clone war. The Federation wouldn't ever blockade Naboo because bureaucracy would continue to churn. The new trade laws passed by Valorum when he became Chancellor would become the law of the Republic, though it wouldn't change the corruption. By the time the Chosen One reached adulthood, there would be a temporary break, but it would find resolve before a true peace treaty could be started. Dooku remained vocal in politics, but without external pushes, he would never leave the Order. He would live long enough to join his master on his deathbed, Yoda's last student finally being the one to outlive him. It would be a somber day, one where Talzin and the Council and close friends would gather to be with Yoda, though his conscious ability to form a bond between the Order and the Nightsisters, with the help of Talzin, would set the Jedi up into a direction that would benefit them for generations. Anakin would grow up in a galaxy without the Sith, one in the loving embrace of a woman he considered his mother, being Talzin. He'd be surrounded by thousands of brothers and sisters, Jedi and clan, that supported him and rallied around him. Balance was brought to the Force by his mere existence, but his challenges would consist of maintaining unity with the clan and the Order, while also pushing back against rises of potential conflict in the galaxy. this would be a peace eternally achieved through the balanced sect of Force users, a bond that would positively impact society for thousands of years to come. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about the Mother, the Witch, and the Order. I thought this story needed to take place and would be best beneficial if it took place around 35 years after the Acolyte. Acolyte's 132, this is like 97, like 30 years before Palpatine was brought into Plagueis' ranks. I felt like it would be better if it started there, because I don't really feel that, like, even with the Clone Wars, I really don't feel like you'd get the most out of the Jedi Order and the Night Sister bond by making it set up during the Clone Wars. I feel like that would just be too along the lines of what would be expected. Using the Sith during the Acolyte era, and using Keemir and Osha specifically to kind of turn on Plagueis by going after the Night Sisters to ruin the dynamic, is kind of the best way to create that divide. I don't really feel like Plagueis would organically go after the Night Sisters. I don't really feel like Sidious would even do that until the Empire came along. So it gives time for more to happen and more time for us to actually acclimate to the change instead of it all being in like the last 5 minutes. So what really I enjoy most about this story in particular is that you actually get to see the Jedi Order and the Night Sisters working really well, and when we meet them, they're at like the highest level of their production. So all their weeds that they had to get out of the way, they're all cleared, and you're seeing the Jedi and Night Sisters operate the most uniformly as they ever had. I felt that using Anakin's birth as the reason the Sith and the Jedi had their final confrontation and the reason Palpatine is stopped would be the perfect way for balance to be brought through him without him actually needing to bring balance himself. I think having Talzin specifically as a main character in this was very necessary, and I really think the way the story is developed gives a lot of breathing time to enjoy the aspect of the Order and Sisters as a collection, as a group, and see how they would actually work as a team to stop the Sith, which is what you see on Tatooine. So I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.